it's crucial to see the company as an organism from the get-go, where regulatory is a part of it and where the intended use, intended purpose creates a whole. Because everything you do in regard to this intended use or intended purpose is going to be relevant in terms of the money you might be able to make. When you create a product and you have the value on the one side, and on the other hand, you have the regulatory pathway that you have to take. If you only look at one or the other isolated, you're missing the full picture. Not having an intended purpose usually shows that the whole business idea might be on a bit of a shaky ground. You might have a great technology, but if you're not able to tell that to the market, then you just have a big problem.
Welcome back to another episode of the GS MedTech podcast, where I speak with industry leaders shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Dame Medarski, and today I'm joined by Malte Knowles Schmidt, Global Portfolio Manager for Software, AI, and Cybersecurity in Medical Devices at TÜV Süd. Malte has built and scaled product teams, launched digital health solutions into clinical environments, and understands firsthand how product decisions translate into regulatory and commercial outcomes. We've had numerous conversations on how companies can navigate regulatory complexity, not just to get approved, but to build defensible, scalable businesses in digital health, and decided to share it all with you. Malte, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So as I said, we've had several conversations and we've touched on many points while we were discussing, but I thought we can definitely start on the clear shift where regulatory is no longer just a compliance function, but a core value driver. How do you see that evolving specifically in digital health and SAMD?
Yeah, that's a good first question that we can, I guess, already talk a lot about. I think it's shifting, yes, but I think it's also a bit of a mindset topic in general, and how you want to position your company in general. So I think it makes sense to not just see it as something that you have to do, but sort of taking the burden, if you want to call it that, and turn it into something that is beneficial for you. By becoming a startup or by becoming a company, a digital company that really understands that and is also using that for positioning themselves, I think you can increase not just the value of the product that you're building, but also the value of you as a company, because it shows that you have a profound understanding of the environment, you have a profound understanding what is going on. And yeah, at the end of the day, you might bring something to the table that others might not bring to the table, because in particular, digital health is an environment that is quite dynamic. And me, myself, I worked in that environment as a product person. And there were quite a few people coming from the digital space, but not from the digital MedTech space, so to say. And I think this environment is to some degree defined by that as well. And so the learnings that are being made in other digital domains, such as e-commerce or other things like that, are now trying to be transferred to the digital MedTech space. But it's more than just bringing the technology to that space. It also means that you have to bring the regulatory knowledge and the regulatory mindset, because it's, at the end of the day, it's part of the deal, part of the game that you have to play to understand that. If you can show that you understand that and that you build the products with that in mind or driven by that, then that clearly gives an understanding of you understanding also where to apply technology and where to drive value in a regulatory context.
Yeah. And from what I'm seeing, many digital health companies still underestimate how early regulatory strategy impacts valuation. And I know you're spending a lot of your time in just building that ecosystem and understanding to support those companies around that. Why do you think that gap still exists?
That's a good question. I can now answer that from two perspectives. Having been on the manufacturer side in the last 12 years of my life, and now seeing it sort of a little bit from the other perspective, I think the gap is potentially driven by a communication gap that I see, but that's not the core of these things. I think it's on the manufacturer side, it might be a fear of complexity, a fear of things being too restrictive, and also missing the clarity on what is possible. And on the notified body side, or on the regulator side, if you want to call it that, if we don't just think about the European space, there might also be, how can I say that? there might be improvement in terms of how things are being communicated, and also how active the communication hand sort of is reached out to the market. So I think both the manufacturers and the regulators or the notified bodies can get better in understanding each other, and that's actually also why I'm very motivated to join podcasts like these, to show that there is a willingness, and that we can, when we start working together more and collaborate more or communicate more openly, then there would be a great benefit in that.
Last year, I spoke with about 500 startups, and definitely can tell within minutes of having that conversation, especially when you're speaking with an engineer founder, that they think a lot about the product development, but they don't necessarily catch up in terms of the regulatory process. And they don't necessarily think about that maybe until it's too late. So I'm wondering, what are the signals that you look for whenever you're speaking with those companies?
Yeah, good that you talk to them. I also talked to a few, and also having been on that side, something I usually like to understand from the get-go, and that's not necessarily MedTech specific, is you said they're technical people, or in particular, if you're a technical person, it's easy to fall in love with the solution. But me being a former product person, I like to fall in love with the problems. And this is something that I usually try to understand first, if they really have understood the problem, and if they really understood the value that technology that they're building is bringing to the table to solve that problem. Because without that value, it's going to be difficult later on to understand the regulatory burden, if you want to call it that you need to overtake or overcome in order to bring this product to the market. So this is what I'm trying to understand, is what is the value? Also, how do you want to communicate the value to your potential users in the future? What are the claims you're trying to make and things like that? So very non-regulatory questions, actually, like what is your go-to-market strategy? What is your business case looking like? Things like that. Because there you can already tell, in general, if they understood the environment and understood the specific rules that environment brings.
There's still a tendency to delay regulatory planning until after product market fit. How does that approach fundamentally break in digital health?
Well, regulatory planning or regulatory strategy or regulatory roadmap, whatever you want to call that, can actually happen at any stage, early stage, or should start in early stage, but it can actually happen at any stage. The question is just, how deep do you go? How deep are you planning? So even if you just have an idea in mind or a problem in mind that you're trying to fix, this is something that is worthwhile considering. Okay, what are the regulatory approaches to this topic? Because if you're planning to cure cancer or something like that with an app, then that's a great idea. And at the same time, you might want to think about, okay, what is the risk class of the device, and what are the claims that I'm trying to make? I'm not saying you have to dive deep into that and make it a PhD thesis. I'm just saying, have some, I always call it, leave the regulatory ivory tower. Have some people that you can talk to. Obviously, ideally, these could be notified bodies, but these can also be the FDA, these can be clinical research organizations or consultants or whatever it is, if for the sake of reducing your own risk profile or the risk profile of your product idea, this is something that you can do very early on, to just have a bit of a sanity check and understand if the idea that you're having is actually something that would be viable from a regulatory perspective. And you might be surprised that it's actually more viable than you might be fearing in the beginning. Yeah. So don't push it off. Don't be shy. Leave that regulatory ivory tower and start talking to people that will give you more answers than you think.
Yeah. And almost balancing that potential over-engineering on the regulatory thoroughly while you're still avoiding costly rework later, because you educate yourself, you have that information, but you're still focusing on what's priority at that time, which is obviously product development.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it's always important to make conscious decisions and not unconscious decisions. You will make a decision anyhow, whether or not it's conscious or not. That's the question. And and just try to, I know this is something that is being said a lot, and I can only repeat that, but I also want to try to bring a bit more of a lightheartedness to this, like make a conscious decision from the beginning and just talk to people. The same way you're not building a product that you're bringing into the market without any user validation, without any validation of reimbursement or things like that, and then just fire and forget and hope for the best. And the same way, maybe we call it an agile development. And the same way you develop your product and your business in an agile approach where you learn things and you adapt to the things that you're learning. You can do the same with a regulatory approach. You can talk to people, talk to notified bodies, talk to regulators, and see what their response is to your ideas. And this is something that I would highly recommend to also not over-engineer it, but make these conscious decisions and not make unconscious decisions.
And I know you're particularly passionate to say, and especially from TÜV side, to say, talk to us, because we can add value, not necessarily only on the regulatory side, but maybe see some similar case studies where we would not necessarily get engaged in consulting with you, but actually talk to you and give you a little bit of a general overview, so to say. And I'm also seeing a lot of companies struggling to clearly articulate intended use as well, often because product, clinical, and commercial is not necessarily all aligned. How do you see that planning out and playing out?
I mean, it's again, this is I would not say this is a MedTech specific problem that people don't talk in companies. People or companies not being aligned behind a product vision, a company vision, or whatever you would call that. And the same way that is problematic in other industries, the same way it can also be very problematic in the medical device industry. And I think, or at least my feeling is that I see that more in the medical device industry, this isolated thinking of departments. You have the tech department, maybe on the one hand, product department, regulatory, marketing, business, sales, whatever you would call that. And these might be fairly separated. So it's crucial to see the company as an organism from the get-go, where regulatory is a part of it, and where the intended use, intended purpose in connection with the commercial claims and all of these things, that this creates a whole. Because everything you do in regard to this intended use or intended purpose is going to be relevant in terms of the money you might be able to make later on. We see different approaches to that. We see companies who really understand that have maybe regulatory departments and product and tech departments that have a mindset where they are not working isolated, where the, CTO is happy to sit down together with the head of regulatory and the head of marketing to discuss their claim strategy and discuss how they can bring this product to life, because they all understand that independent of the title, they all need to bring an idea, a product, a company idea to life. And these are usually the companies where we also see a very solid intended purpose and use, commercial claim strategy, and all of that going through the regulatory process. Then also afterwards, having a successful business in the market that can actually turn a profit. Other things that we see is that it shows up during the conformity assessment, that the intended purpose was actually an afterthought. So the commercial claim strategy and all of these things, it seems like Russian nesting dolls where you try to fit the bigger one into the smaller one. So it just doesn't fit. It seems like it could be fitting, but it doesn't. And some companies are able to then fix that during the conformity assessment. That's usually where delays come into play. And we don't necessarily need to discuss timelines, but that's also something that is sometimes forgotten, that the timeline is dependent on two parties. It's the manufacturer and the notified body. Yeah. And when things like that appear, then that's usually the case where we see, okay, there's some delays that could have been prevented from the beginning. However, sometimes these companies still are able to fix that, but then they run into another problem afterwards. They have a product in the market, or they have a product that is CE certified product in the market, but because they were missing the intended purpose in the beginning and the purpose of why they're building the company and therefore also not have a clear visibility on the commercial claim side and how they want to bring the product into the market and what the value of their users actually is, that they have a certified product that they don't sell because they don't know how. And not having an intended purpose usually shows that that the whole business idea might be on a bit of a shaky ground. You might have a great technology and you might be able to do things that other people cannot do. But if you're not able to tell that to the market, then you just have a big problem. And that's the other side. And then obviously there's another case where the intended purpose missing or the documentation not following a whole storyline is what we call that, because it needs to be understandable like a story. It needs to be a comprehensive piece of documentation that sometimes they could even lead to not getting a certified product into the market because it's just clear that things were just bolted on and it doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. It makes sense. It's almost like a stepping stone, isn't it? Having that intended purpose firmly solidified and clarified makes sense, because then the downstream consequences are non-existent, maybe in terms of the lack of that definition. But also I'm assuming, and from what you're saying, it feels like the intended purpose is not only a regulatory construct, but it's more of an actually a strategic business tool that helps you to get through that stage of regulatory approval and then successful commercialization.
Absolutely. The same way you would want to have a strong product vision or a strong company vision, completely regardless of the industry that you're building, you need to have something that sort of brings the team together and is guiding every decision, ideally every decision that you're making. You call it strategy, call it whatever, but you don't want individuals in your company making decisions based on a gut feeling. You always want them to refer to something like, hey, guys, this is our strategy, and this is why we should be making this decision and not this decision. And this is what the intended purpose can also do for you. See it as a bigger picture. See the intended purpose as the product purpose or even your company purpose, depending on the size of your company, obviously. So that's something that I can only recommend, to see the things that you have to do, how you can turn those into your advantage. Because at the end of the day, you will have to do that. And the question is, okay, are you able to sort of take out the value that you can take from that as a company and turn it into a success, so to say?
Yeah. And similarly aligned in terms of the importance of the strategic decision, there is a noticeable trend where companies try to engineer their way into maybe a lower risk class to move faster. Are we sacrificing long-term value for short-term speed?
I have a very clear opinion on that. Might say, this Malte is from a notified body, so obviously he has interest in having everybody be a risk class 3, whatever. I don't know. Of course, we are business. Of course, this is something that would be beneficial for us.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there is a regulation that has very clear rules on what is. How clear these rules are is also, I guess, debatable. But there are rules in place that says, okay, depending on what your product is doing, it falls into a certain risk category. So the first thing you need to do is to make a decision, create an intended purpose, and then based on the intended purpose, make a decision what you think the risk class of the device is. And again, all of that falls back to the value of the device. If you are optimizing for a low risk class, you're not optimizing for value. I would say it doesn't have to be completely contrary, but in my opinion or in my experience, this is what it comes down to. You need to understand, what do you optimize for? Do you optimize for value? Do you optimize for low risk class? Whatever it is. And if you do that, if you optimize for a low risk class, then you might want to have a fast market entry. But the question is, for what cost? Generally saying, you're shaving away user value by going down in the risk class. Some people say our approach is we start with a class 1 medical device and then we upscale later on, and all of these things and all of these strategies. Generally speaking, of course, that can be possible. But again, you have to have an honest look into the mirror and ask yourself, is this really what you're going to be doing afterwards? Because once you have a class 1 device in the market, you might spend all your effort on trying to make this class 1 device a success and not spend all of your effort on trying to bring a 2A to B device into the market. So it's totally understand that reflex. And I cannot say that I haven't done that in the past. But what I also realized is that once you have a class 1 device in the market, or even a lifestyle first device in the market, then you're going to be busy optimizing that. And you're not going to be busy taking the next step, because why would you not have done that in the first place?
Yeah. But also entering into a higher class of a device, you're almost increasing the bar of obviously entry level from a competition perspective as well. And as you rightly pointed out, it's not only obviously increasing the potential value and the commercial decision is usually better if you go for a higher class further down the road, but at the same time you are almost defending, at least for a certain period of time, the market entry from competitors, especially if they haven't considered that higher class of a device as well.
That can obviously also be another benefit. Yet when you try to, or when you made the decision that you're not trying to optimize for a low risk class, then that means that you have to have a clear understanding of what the value is that you want to bring to the market, because that's sort of like a clinical evaluation report where you have the benefits on the one side and the risks on the other side. Think about it this way: like when you create a product and you have the value on the one side, the value that you want to bring, and also your business value, and on the other hand you have the regulatory pathway that you have to take. If you only look at one or the other isolated, like you're missing the full picture. If you have understood the commercial value or the value of your product totally, then then this also helps you later on to make these decisions and sort of jump over that hurdle and understand what that is, and that will also help you in regard to positioning your device or your product fully, and that might also help you in positioning yourself against your competition. Again, seeing this as a tool to position yourself just against the competition, I don't know if that creates enough motivation. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess. Enough motivation or enough internal resources to push it for that higher risk class. Try to see it in a bigger picture.
So how should founders think about defensibility in relation to regulatory classification?
Yeah, I guess defensibility in terms of they had a too low risk class and then somebody says, hey, this is not correct. Like, how should we defend that? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in general, again, try to talk to a notified body or a regulator as early as possible and really try to understand what makes a class 1 a class 1 and a class 2B a class 2B, like where are the differentiators, and be honest with yourself. Don't try to build up argumentation that you don't really believe in yourself. Try to build up argumentation that you're really convinced is a sound argumentation, and talk to a notified body about it, or the FDA, or whoever you might want to talk to it about it, to see if they agree in your assumption. Like you mentioned consulting before, and this has been said a lot of times that notified bodies are not allowed to consult, but we're able to have a conversation with you. We're able to see, okay, what is your intended purpose? What is the risk class of your device? And then we can say if we agree or if we don't agree. Of course, we can do that. And the same with your clinical strategy, because it's not just always the device itself that could be critical. It's the clinical claims that you're making that you need to have clear evidence on. And in terms of defensibility, I mean, it's easy to jump at the risk class of the device, but also if you're making claims that you're not able to make and where you have no evidence, then that can also create quite a problem for you. Yeah.
But I'm also seeing companies treating claims as something to define too late in the process as well, once the product is built. How problematic is that in reality?
Yeah. I find it very problematic. I'm just trying to give an answer that is not just from a regulatory perspective, because It's similar to asking, have you done do you have a product market fit? Would it be problematic to have a startup or to invest in a startup that cannot show clear evidence of a product market fit or even willingness to pay or something like this? If you don't have that, then okay, how problematic might that be for the risk sort of profile of that company? And in the same way, I see that with commercial claims. Your commercial claims are basically the foundation of your business model. So where do you want to go with your device? Who do you want to sell it to? Like, what are the arguments that you want to use to sell your device to that particular market? And how can you even build a business case if you don't know that? So that's something that I always struggle with. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can be fairly high level, but yet something that you have to be doing from the beginning, because at the end of the day, coming back to building a device that cures cancer, if you build a device that might even do that, if you're not able to tell that to anybody, how are you going to make any money with that? And in my mind, at least, or what we also try to build in the past, is to have the intended purpose and the risk class and the commercial claims, like have a sort of product one pager, something like that, that is visible to everybody and that is something that is being discussed everywhere, and is basically the foundation for every decision that the company is making, because it's so vital. And if, coming back to your question, if you then bolt like a significant part of that just on in the end, in my opinion, that shows that you might not even be building a business that might be viable. So yeah, I think bolting them on in the end potentially is probably one of the biggest business risks, I would say.
And especially in SAMD, do you think stronger claims are becoming even a bigger differentiator than the underlying technology on its own?
I said that before at some point, that like sometimes I would even think that the commercial claim is more valuable than your device. You could build something that technically has been done there before, and in the rise of AI and all of these things, technology might become less of a differentiator also in the future. A commercial claim strategy or your commercial claims that you can connect to that device, these might become more valuable. Bringing another problem, like what if somebody else is building a similar device and then can they just like piggyback on these commercial claims? Sure, that could also be a problem. But at the same time, I mean, this is another way where you have to find a good strategy to make your device so unique or create your clinical evidence in such a unique way that it's only applicable to your device. I don't have a clear answer on that, but to answer your question, I think this could be some truth that the commercial claims might be more valuable, if you want to say it that way, than the technology you have.
And with digital health, especially AI-driven platforms, it seems like product architecture decisions seem to have massive regulatory implications. How early should that thinking come in place?
Yeah. You're probably referring to like building a product monolith or not, and seeing how you can separate
monolithic platforms versus modular systems, let's
Yes.
say.
Totally. I mean, as soon as you start thinking about your software architecture or your devices architecture, it makes it, and also into what is your intended purpose, but also how do you see the product develop in the future? Like, then you should ask yourself, are there any decisions that we can make on an architecture base that will help us along our regulatory pathway? What does that mean? That means if you have a AI device or a device that contains some AI technology, then see in which part of the device that is. In particular, if you take a look at software as medical device, standalone software devices, that might have some functionalities that are non-medical functionalities or functionalities that have a lower risk class than potentially the AI functionality or things like that. So you can make smart decisions where you separate these devices into smaller parts that are then also easier to handle. So you can make sure that your technical documentation and all of these things are only relevant for the sort of circled out medical functionality of your device and not the rest of it. In the past, I was involved, for example, with diabetes applications. And a typical question there was usually, you have the whole glucose measurement topics and showing of the glucose values and maybe giving some advice on how to change behavior and things like that, which has a clear medical device taste, I would say. But then there were also things like a recipe blog or other things which do not have a medical purpose. And if you separate these two, then you slim down your technical documentation quite a bit if you can leave all of that out. And that's, I think also relevant in terms of AI. And if the AI is part of your medical device or has a medical device functionality, then, well, that will then be part of the medical device.
Yeah. And how do you see that evolving with adaptive AI and continuous learning systems?
I think that's adaptive AI and continuous learning system is a big topic. And also we have this whole PCCP discussion in the FDA going on and things like that. We recently discussed that also internally quite a bit. I like to see it or frame it in the same way as other software changes, because most of these devices that we're looking at are Class 2A and Class 2B medical device software products or software as medical device. And the same is true for AI. So if the product is changing and you're holding a Class 2A, Class 2B QMS certificate, so you're you're only changing the product and you're not changing your quality management system. Most of these changes are actually changes that you can apply within your certified quality management system, and you would not have to bring those changes to the notified body. Some of these changes you might have to report without waiting for an answer. So you just report them, sort of like sending a postcard. But most product changes you can actually do without the involvement of a notified body. They will come once a year for the annual surveillance audit and then surveil your changes. And obviously you have to have strong documentation and evidence that all of these changes are in regard to risk assessments and all of these things. But the notified body is not becoming an external dependency, so to say. And I find that very relevant also with AI and with AI systems that continue to learn. Not speaking for 100%, but for most of the cases, you don't even need a notified body involvement when these devices develop. Of course, you need to have evidence that the performance and all of these things of these devices stay strong and stay within the region or within the range that you're expecting it to. But you don't necessarily need to have a notified body giving you the check mark before you're actually bringing this to the market.
And I'm also curious on ISO 13485.
Yeah.
Maybe from a regulatory perspective and as an advice to companies that potentially are currently not having it implemented, but are thinking when is the best time to start implementing it. What would you advise them?
It's never too early. That's not true. So I would advise them, first of all, understand what the value really is that can bring to you as a company. Sometimes it's all these quality management system certifications and all of these things. Like a very high level, not to say shallow answer is, it helps your company and it helps to improve your quality and all of these things. But in reality, that is not the case if you don't know how to use it. So if you really try to, similar to the intended purpose, if you really try to use the regulatory requirements to your advantage, the 13485 can actually become something like this. An early 13485 certification can become something like this. Because I'm speaking from my own behavior. If there's something that you have to adhere to, like if you want to work out more and you try to do it on your own, then there's a certain rate of success to it. But if you have a friend or multiple friends who tell you, hey, come on, it's time to go for a run, then chances of success might be higher. So if you have your intended purpose and all of these things, and if you have the solid understanding that, yes, you are on the pathway of building a medical device and you fully internalize that and you understand the value that you're bringing to the market, then you will also understand that having a 13485 certification will help you to develop a quality management system that will actually allow you to bring this product to the market. So you sort of do your homework earlier and not just in the bus on the way to school. So, and you can use this to also frame yourself in terms of, or in the face of investors as a company that understands what they are up to, because you might not have a MDR certification or an FDA approval or something like this, but you're a pretty significant step along the way, because what the 13485 says, the certification, is that you are a medical device manufacturer. And that's pretty significant. So yeah, it shows that you understand what's up, you understand, or you show regulatory maturity, and you understand that you're up to the task, because you can also clearly benefit from that. If we put the 13485 in respect to the MDR certification, for example, of course you can do it both together. That might be economically more attractive to you, but you might be buying a potential delay of your MDR certificate. Why is that? Because both certifications are so close together that if the 1345 in the audits, they are seeing that there are some significant parts missing, some significant processes might be missing, and you need to rework that before you can start your MDR certification. Like, this is something that will then later on delay your MDR certificate by a few months. And if you take at the cost, take a look at the potential costs that might bring if you do it early on, then that will be dwarfed by the potential loss that you are creating by delaying your MDR certificate.
Yeah, so almost having that box ticked before even engaging on the regulatory side would potentially speed up the process, or at worst case scenario, it won't slow it down if there are any changes that are required.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can always see it as a box ticked. Sure, fair enough. Do it. Do that, see the whole regulatory pathway is something that you have to do, and you try to do it as lean as possible. I'm not saying that is an approach that I don't empathize with, but I'm just trying to bring the full picture, and also trying to bring it into the picture of if we look at the sort of lifetime of companies. Like, somebody posted on LinkedIn the other day that there are four valleys of death of medical device startups. And I mean, commercialization in the end is one of them. So this is something that you have to understand, that at the end of the day, you're trying to build a strong foundation to then later on focus. Ideally, later on, you focus a lot more on keeping a successful business alive, and not sort of filling in the blanks of your regulatory, your quality management systems and things like that. Because once you want to scale and really go through the roof with your business, these are the friends that you want to trust on, and one of them is a proper quality management system.
Yeah. And I mean, you've already mentioned it, and I just want to reiterate it from an investor's perspective as well. Just having that ISO 13485 while you're pursuing regulatory approval gives investors a little bit more confidence in terms of the process that you're undertaking and the steps that you're taking to your regulatory approval as well. But equally so, having that regulatory readiness actually influences their decision to know that they're expecting that you will get approved, albeit it's not guaranteed, but timelines are more, I would say, visible and understandable from an investor's perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's timeline, but it's also the risk profile of the startup is what I would call that. So, I mean, a very high level would be like, this is when we're planning to do that. And then usually what you see at the roadmap, at some point, there's a MDR certificate bullet point, and that's it. And that's the regulatory pathway. Maybe there is a time frame for a clinical study, potentially, but that is it. So the way I see it, this regulatory readiness, and that's also what I tried to say before, is that it's not a one-time thing. This is something that needs to be reiterated, independent of the stage that you are in. You can always talk to a notified body, and you can always, with the information that you have a session with a notified body and get feedback on what it is that you're planning. So you can always sort of get a sort of sanity check on these things, and think about it in the same way that, imagine you're you're at your MVP stage, or you're validating your willingness to pay. This is something that you might be building without even having a product. You might have a landing page where you have a buy now button, and then maybe not as much used in the medical device space, but this is how you could validate a willingness to pay for, let's say, a non-commercial, non-medical device. And then you get some evidence, even though you don't have a product. So imagine from an investor perspective, imagine you have two startups. You have one startup that has validated their minimum viable product, or I like to call it a minimum validatable product, alongside multiple claims. So they have some landing pages where they showcase their product, where they might have some claims or something like this. Let's keep this as a thought experiment. I'm not saying this is something that you should be doing or can be doing, having claims that are not proven yet, or say they have customer interactions where they talk about potential claims. Let's put it that way. They have an MVP and all of these things, and they tested 5 claims. And based on these 5 claims, they figured out the 2 most commercially viable claims. Then they don't even have a product. They then talk to a clinical research organization, what that would mean in terms of costs for a clinical study. They then talk to a notified body and said, hey, this is what we're planning. Does that seem legit or not to you? And then they build their business case out of it. And then they show that to investors and say, hey, these are the claims. This is the product. We already have a clinical research organization that agreed that this could be the clinical study. And we talked to Süd or other notified bodies, obviously. And they said, yeah, this is something that is realistic. So we have some sort of, we have a certain level. I'm not saying validated, because that's very tricky in this context, but a confirmed regulatory strategy. So that's startup A. And then you have startup B, who didn't do any of that, but they pitch the technology, they pitch ideas, and then they say, yeah, and in 2028, we are planning to have a CE certificate. I hope it's clear what I'm trying to say. Like, it's very, very different risk profiles. At the end of the day, it's a very different business case that they have, and a very different, the business case is just standing on much stronger feet than if you don't do that. And it's actually easier to do that than you would think. It's a few conversations that you have to have that give you, or that reduces already the risk of investing in you.
Yeah, amazing. So if I can take all of our conversations together and summarize them, and what you're wanting to clearly communicate with a lot of startups is that notified bodies, and in particular to Süd and your approach, is for companies to see you not necessarily as a necessary hurdle, but a strategic partner that can help along the way.
Absolutely. Again, we are not allowed to consult. And this is something that we also have to repeat, because it's just what it is. Which doesn't mean that we cannot have conversations. And the better prepared you are for these conversations, the more information you can take out of this. And there is actually quite a lot of information that you can take out of these things. See us as a partner, absolutely. Also try to see who the best partner for that would be for you. See, do you speak the same language? Do you like the people that you're talking to? I mean, these are all these small details. It's like figuring out. See us more as a colleague, a person that you want to hire. So the same way you have a hiring process where you, do a technical check, then the CEO wants to talk to that person or whatever. Then you have a team check, you invite them for a cup of coffee. And then at the end of the day, you make a full picture decision on the fact if you want to hire this person or not. In the same way, I would recommend to talk to or try to find the right fit of a notified body for you. And there, again, it also comes down to how are they dealing with changes of the device? Like, what is their philosophy on that and all of these things? Yeah, it can be a partner and you can create a relationship like that. Obviously, a relationship always goes both ways. So see if you can form that relationship, or you can also not do that. That's also fair. And you can also see the notified bodies as a gatekeeper and build a relationship like that. I'm not saying, I am saying I would do it in the relationship way and reach out to people like me, for example, and see what are possibilities and what are things that we can talk about. Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
I have
sure.
a set of provocative questions, if you don't mind me shooting them.
Okay. You can always decide to not answer, but
Absolutely fine. Where do you think notified bodies themselves need to evolve to keep up with digital health?
Let me think about it for a second. So to keep up with digital health, I think we are already doing quite a good job.
Okay.
In particular, in terms of AI, like the AI Act and all of these things, and coming up with clear sets of requirements that can then also be followed by manufacturers. This is something that we're working on, but also I think that the overall regulatory landscape in Europe is not necessarily been created with digital devices in mind. So I think this is something where we can be more transparent and where we can do more educational work on showing people how we interpret certain regulatory requirements and things like this. So I think that can be improved. Yeah. And at the same time, this is impossible without having dialogues with the manufacturers. We can produce something. Communication always goes both ways. We need to understand, is that communication actually valuable for manufacturers or not? So I think in general, the notified body and manufacturers, we need to learn a new way of having a new way of relationship almost. Like a couple of years ago, there like notified bodies had an issue with capacity. That's a secret that is not really a secret. That defined the dynamic between manufacturers and notified bodies. That situation has already changed, and I think we should use that situation and make the best out of it to actually use the time that is available now to actually create these conversations and improve on communication.
And I couldn't agree more in terms of obviously the change of relationship, because we are seeing it from a lot of the startups that we are communicating with in terms of their regulatory strategies and where do they see or give preference to, because of the challenges that used to be are no longer challenges. But at the same time, I'm not sure how many of the at least current cohort of early stage companies understand that, and whether they're actually at the position now to make that decision with a little bit more confidence that obviously all of that is behind, and notified bodies are a lot more hands-on and have that capacity to accommodate even higher degree of influx of potential new companies than what's out there at the moment. But it takes some time to obviously get through that cycle before you are able to instill that confidence that used to be the case 10 years ago from US companies coming over to Europe as well. Initially. And I think, as you rightly point out, potentially software and identifying those issues or hurdles in advance might give that confidence to those companies, because otherwise it's my opinion that maybe Europe is at risk of slowing innovation compared to the US because of those changes.
Absolutely. I don't know if that has become clear already, but I'm trying to make this a little bit of my mission to appear obviously more approachable and be approachable, not just appear like that, but also trying to bring in new frameworks into how we are communicating with the market and how we're communicating in general. We started, similar to this podcast, we started we call them podcast style webinars, where we just have discussions with our experts about particular topics, and where we then have people come in with questions and do sort of a live Q&A session and things like that. All of that is obviously to answer also questions, but also to show that we are also human beings, and we are also interested in having a relationship with our customers that actually helps them to be successful. Because at the end of the day, if the manufacturers are successful, we are successful as well. So that's how we're trying to frame it.
Nice one. So for any medical device manufacturers that are building software-focused devices and products in MedTech, obviously they can feel free to reach out directly to you and have that initial conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, Malte, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I think it was very informative, and hopefully lots of founders and CEOs find it useful as well in their decision-making process.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. And if anybody has any feedback, you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you would like to discuss any topics with me, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to also talk.
No, my pleasure.